Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about the Super HD System 3 Pro. Before we do that though, I want to just ask a simple favor. If you guys could like this video, comment down in the comments, and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed. And also potentially follow me on all the social media stuff. That stuff's in the description: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, all that sort of stuff. And if you don't mind, check out my new channel called Flying and Eating. I'll put a link in there as well. It's literally about adventures of flying and eating stuff. It should be a lot of fun. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about this actual device. So thank you for that. Now, this device actually comes to me from Stone Age Gamer. I'll put a link in the description if you want to check this out or any of the other stuff that they have. So full disclosure, they sent this to me for free for the purposes of review. And it's a pretty cool little device. Now, in short, what it is a device that you connect to the back of a PC engine, whether it be the white version, the Turbografx, or the Turbografx 2, and it allows you to basically play every single game ever made off of an SD card, and it even has bonus features like RGB output and all sorts of other stuff. Now, that might sound a little familiar, and there's a reason. We did a video like this not that long ago. In fact, I think it was only like a year ago I reviewed this, the Super SD System 3, which is exactly what I just described. This one, like I said, did a whole video. I loved the thing. I had very little negative to say about it. It was quite neat. So I was a little surprised to find out that TerraOnion, who made this, decided to make an updated version. And even more surprised when Stone Age Gamer was cool enough to be like, yeah, here's one, so have fun. So thank you very much to them again. So yeah, they made an updated version. Now, rather than focus entirely on what this is as a brand new piece of technology, because we kind of already did that in the first video, I'm mostly going to focus on the newer updates and just kind of give a basic summation if you're brand new to this. If you are brand new to this, like I said, that's the whole point of it, is it's just a device you attach to the back of a PC engine, and through, you know, SD cards being planted on games, it allows you access to play those games. It's compatible with Turbografx 16 games, as seen here, as well as the Japanese PC Engine games. It also will actually run the CD games as well. Now, the CD games were already region-free, so it doesn't matter if it's the American ones or the Japanese ones, they will run. Now, you're looking at it like there is no disk drive, and that's the whole point. You load up ISOs of those games onto the SD card, and it can run them. The only catch with that is when you're setting up the folder structure for those, the ISOs cannot just be thrown into one generic folder. You have to create individual folders for every single game. So it's best to create, like, you know, whatever the game is, you know, maybe it's like Rondo of Blood or whatever. You just create the folder called Rondo of Blood, and then you put the ISO within that folder. So basically, you know, it's organization, but it's also a necessity. But the individual ROMs for cartridge-based games or the HuCard-based games can all be in one bulk folder if you want, but it's best to space them out for, you know, reasons of, you know, I think there might be a potential character limit or a number of file limit within a simple folder, but also just for organizational purposes. But those are like little things you should know in advance. If you're updating from the previous one, there are a few key changes. First and foremost is a very questionable one, which is the color. The original one was this nice kind of transparent black. This one's this kind of it's not that blue is hideous, it's just kind of hideous within the context because it doesn't look like, it doesn't really match anything. It makes me legit wonder if they just had a surplus on like blue plastic or something. I just don't understand why you would choose that particular color. But whatever, that doesn't affect the design or the features. It's just kind of strange. The other features that have changed are mostly under the hood and on the back. So one of the issues, I didn't run into this much, but I guess a lot of other people did. I had a very late version of the Super SD System 3, but I guess earlier versions had a lot of problems with their RGB output, and so they were slightly changing that over time. You know, some hardware revisions under the hood, as well as like firmware updates and everything. But with this one, they just completely redesigned under the hood so the RGB output would be better, which is a feature that both of these devices offer. Once you connect them to the back of a PC engine, a device that only natively had composite RF, and natively had composite, you know, if you were connecting it to one of these, you know, interface units, if you had the whole CD rig, or if you had the Turbografx that actually had composite output native, that was the best you were ever going to get. With this, by connecting it, it actually will support composite if you insist on continuing to use that. It also will support RGB. which is great because then you have access to RGB SCART capabilities, but also what I would recommend is HD Retrovision's component cables. Specifically the Sega Genesis Model 2 style. It's actually the same port that's on this is on the Sega Genesis Model 2 as well as the 32X. Video quality off of those is sublime. It's phenomenal. Like I said, they both work that way. It's just that this, I guess, offers, under the hood anyway, is better at it because the console doesn't natively support it, so they had to put extra hardware in here to extract the signal and then basically create an RGB image. So that's great. The other thing that they did that is brand new is that they created an HDMI port. Now, an HDMI port is kind of like one step forward and one step back at the exact same time. It's totally for convenience. This is actually not how I would recommend connecting the console. Let's just put it this way. The RGB port is more of the purest output. The HDMI port is more of the convenience output. The legitimate original resolution and all that, the purest signal is going to come out of this RGB port. That is how I ultimately use it, or I would if I was actually playing on it. But since I basically captured very similar to the same concept before, all the footage in this video will be captured off the HDMI port, which is by no means bad. It's just kind of the McDonald's burger solution. Like, it's convenient, it works, it's just not necessarily ideal. But I actually applaud them for doing this because I'm gonna be honest, like, I'm already built for the RGB infrastructure. Most people aren't. So if you're like, hey man, I'm just getting into the system and now you're telling me I have to buy these super expensive cables and then they won't work because of the resolution, so I have to buy like a RetroTink 5X and all these other things. Like, my one device that was already expensive, I now have to add on hundreds of dollars and other things just to experience the console. A native HDMI output, while not the best video option, is admittedly convenient, and I imagine that's very good for people just trying the basics of trying out the console and seeing if they like it and all that. So it's there. It offers 720p output. I think you can adjust the resolution slightly with a couple of different options. There are actually a lot of video options contained within the system, so you can fine-tune a bunch of things. It's just that the options for the HDMI output port are more limited than the other one. But ultimately, there's actually a ton of options in there, and it's really a matter of like how much you care and how much you want to tweak stuff. But, you know, as you've seen in some of this footage, I did change a few things just so you guys can get a sense of it. But even this is again captured footage, and it's, you know, compressed and edited and uploaded, and, you know, it goes through YouTube. So at best, just kind of a glimpse of the idea. But the HDMI output was fine. It's just that I personally would recommend the RGB output. The third port here is also a micro USB port. This is really just for like development use. You really have no reason to access that. I certainly never did, so there it is. And then the last one, which was actually one of those features where like I didn't realize I needed it until I realized it had it. This is a reset button, which may not sound like a big deal, but the Turbografx 16 and the PC Engine didn't really have that. You basically had to power cycle if you want to turn the console off and reset games. When it's just one game, I guess it's not that big of a deal, but a reset button makes it more like a Sega Genesis or Mega Drive or Super Nintendo reset button, where it just kind of relaunches the same game you already started. However, if you just click it, that's a simple reset. If you actually hold it down, then it will reset back to the Super HD System 3 menu system, which I think is better, because if you hold it down, then you get into that and you can change to the game to whatever you want, rather than having to power cycle. You know, technically it's there. Now, you could still just power cycle, that's fine, but either way, it's there. Those are the biggest changes, to be honest. There's one more, but we'll get to it. And then on the side, there's also a micro SD card slot. This is actually the one thing I think it did worse, other than debatably the color. Getting the micro SD card in and out of this port was surprisingly difficult. It's just a little too wedged in there. And so you either need like really long fingernails, or I got to a point where I was using a screwdriver and just kind of poking at it so that it would hit the spring and then pop back out. So that's like the one hardware design where I'm like, just the plastic shape isn't quite right. So yeah, but that's about it for that. Now, to talk a little bit of other compatibility matters, as I said, or well, I should have said, I did say, it's compatible with Turbografx games and PC Engine games, so we'll throw something up here. So you got like I think it's Pac-Mania or whatever it is, just so you can see it. Now, again, as a reminder, all the footage in this is recorded with that HDMI output, and despite using that, that is not what I recommend. I recommend HD Retrovision component cables running out of the RGB port. I just want to be very clear about it, but since the HDMI port is the new feature, I figured it made sense to show it this way. But yeah, it runs those games no problem. Now, if you want games, you have one of two solutions. You either rip your own, provided you have a collection, and I believe this device actually does support the ability to back up your own hue cards to the device. The alternative is you have to sail the high seas of the internet and get them yourself. Once you do that, you have to put them on the SD card, and you basically set it up however you like. I typically break it down by console, so you know, PC Engine and Turbografx 16 being one thing. You could separate them by region if you want to, and then Turbografx or PC Engine CD being a separate thing entirely. So those are really just a matter of organization and how you like doing it. So that's no big deal. Another thing to keep in mind when you first get it is that it probably will need a firmware update. And here's something that TerraOnion gets some criticism for. Not from me, I don't mind doing this, but I know a lot of people don't. A lot of these devices do have firmware updates, and it just depends on how you go about doing it. Some companies, like EverDrive by Crix, he doesn't really care. He just releases the firmware updates for free online and says, like, yeah, go ahead, whatever, who cares. TerraOnion, not that they charge money for their firmware updates, it's just that rather than like doing one update that's publicly blasted, they have a serial number inside the device. Now, I don't mind showing you mine because I've already registered it, but when you first get it, you have to register, you have to go onto their website, create an account, and register that, because every single firmware update is only released exclusively to you through that registered number, and you cannot share firmware. So if, like, for some reason you're like, hey, my friend bought one, I'm just gonna use his firmware file, don't do that, it won't work. So I registered mine, got the firmware update, and updating it is very easy. Once you've got the file, you just throw it on the root of the SD card, and the next time you boot up the console, it'll just recognize it and say, like, all right, do you want to do this? You say yes, and then it's like, okay, give me a minute, and then it updates, and that's really all there is to it. You just give it a few minutes, and you're good to go. So at the moment, it's got the latest firmware, but I personally did have to update it right out of the box, so make sure you do that. Yeah, and then of course, if I didn't, it does run the CD games. This was actually, not that I was surprised by this, but there are various features within the CD system that you should know. Some, they can adjust the read speeds of the games, so TerraOnion likes to replicate original hardware, although technically, because it's not actually reading a disc off of via a laser, it can try to do it faster, but that can create certain performance problems and create unintentional bugs, because ultimately this is hardware emulation. There's an FPGA in here. So it's best to just kind of, you know, tinker one by one and play what you like. And, you know, one can argue that it's probably best to leave it as OG as possible, but regardless, you know, there are settings in there for that. But the one that's very important for CD stuff is when you go through, there will be an option that talks about CD BIOS files. Now, that is an essential file that you must get on your own and place into the SD card in order for the device to be able to read the CD-based games. And once again, you have to get them via the high seas of the internet. But once you do that, it's best to go into the system, into the settings, find the BIOS file, pick whichever one you want. It doesn't matter if it's North American or Japanese or whatever. Just pick one. And then from that point on, it'll be able to play your CD games. So no big deal there. Now, and actually, while I was playing it, that was kind of interesting because the device also has the ability to create save files for individual games, particularly the CD-based games, which is a wonderful thing. So the last time I had actually played Rondo of Blood was on the previous version of this, where it had apparently saved my progress. So when I booted this up, it had my progress, and I was able to just continue despite being on a totally different machine, which was very neat, because it just saves directly to the SD card. So it's got all sorts of cool features like that under the hood. There's a lot to tinker with. There's also the cover art mode. This is kind of interesting. I'm just talking about it. I don't personally want to use it. But there's a file you can get on TerraOnion's website, once again, placed in the root directory of the SD card. And when you're in the settings, there's an option between list and cover view. List is pretty simple. It literally just is a list of all your games in just text form. But you can set it to cover view, and then once you go into a folder and you tell it to scan that folder, it will scan all the games you have and then create artwork for them, or it doesn't create them, but it, you know, extracts them and shows them. This is cosmetically interesting, but I don't like it because it makes the whole thing, the UI, feel a little clunky, and it kind of slows things down. I imagine this is neat for a minute if you're just trying to learn the library, but like once you know what games you want to play, this is the slower method. So, but that's just personal preference. You can do whatever you want with that. Now, the one thing I have not mentioned at all in this is one of the biggest features that about it, which is it actually supports SuperGrafx games. Now the SuperGrafx I would love to show you, but I don't actually own one. The SuperGrafx, you can kind of think of it as a PC Engine Pro, like PS4 Pro. At one point, NEC released an updated version with extra, power, extra capabilities, and if developers wanted to, they could, take advantage of it. However, that rarely happened. There was only a handful of games ever made for it, but the previous model of this simply couldn't support them. This version can. So even if you're just running a standard PC Engine with this thing attached, you can try out those core graphics games and try, all their enhanced modes and all that sort of stuff. It's a small library, admittedly. I'm showing you footage of it now, of course. However, I actually ran through every single one that I had, which was only 5. But I gotta admit, these games were all pretty good. I actually quite enjoyed playing them. They're all pretty solid games. I think they're all probably very expensive titles too. So it's definitely neat that that's there because that unlocks additional capabilities. The irony is, while I don't have a SuperGrafx, I read about this, and apparently if you actually use this on it is compatible with a SuperGrafx, but ironically if you try to run SuperGrafx games with it, it might actually create new issues because while it does work, it's essentially creating certain conflicts. So ironically, if you have a SuperGrafx, this is probably not the best device to connect to it. I would recommend just, again, a standard white PC Engine, the Core Graphics or the Core Graphics 2. So while I have your attention on that, I should probably talk about compatibility of which types of consoles. Now, not really surprised if you know anything about the PC Engine and the Turbografx 16. NEC made a lot of different versions. So I keep pointing out those 3 because that's really what it was designed for. That's what TerraOnion officially claims support for. Like I said, it kind of works on the SuperGrafx. It does not work on the Shuttle or the Duo because they don't have the port for it. Like straight up, it just doesn't. And despite you've seen this American Turbografx 16 with the CD unit, this is purely cosmetic. I'm actually bringing this out to make the point that it doesn't work with this. Its games do, but this device cannot physically be connected to that. Now, the reason for that, well, you could take the Turbografx out and try to connect it. In fact, the first model, I actually could get it in, but it was a little tight. And then I was later informed, it's a little tight because they didn't want it to be connected to that. Now, technically, the pins can match, and if you were to physically get it connected, it would work. But it's highly recommended not to do that because the plastic shape is a little bit different, and so you risk potentially bending the pins. So I guess I would say this. Officially, TerraOnion says do not put it in the Turbografx 16. Officially, it is not supported. So if you try to connect it, you risk potentially damaging one or the other. And that's not on TerraOnion. It's ultimately on you for having done that. But technically speaking, if you actually got a secure connection between the pins in this and the pins in that, it would function. It's just really not recommended to even try. Ultimately, where do I totally draw the line on this? What's my final thoughts? It's very, very good. Other than, again, the color and the way the SD card goes about, I don't have any actual complaints about it. It would be nice if it worked in the Turbografx 16 more natively, I guess, but I don't. Clearly, that doesn't really apply to me as a problem. Also, admittedly, PC engines are cheaper and easier to get than Turbografx 16s. And it doesn't require a power supply. It's completely powered by the actual original console, which is great. I love pretty much everything about it, but the flaw here is this is really good if you have not got the previous one. If you're just like, hey man, I'm just getting into the console, I want to check it out, the games are really expensive, they're really hard to get, whatever, what should I do? You can't do better than marrying these two things together. It's just awesome. However, if you already own this one and you're asking, like, is it worth the upgrade? Probably not, because they're rather expensive, and it depends on how much of a purist you are. Like, if you already have this one and you know, maybe you're really, really into the superior RGB capabilities, yes, technically this one is better than that one in that regard, particularly depending on which version of this one you had, early or late, but that's a small thing. SuperGrafx, yes, that's nice. It's nice that it has that. Again, you'd have to be a super purist to really buy another one of these for just 5 games of compatibility, although I think technically it's 7. I think there's 2 ISO ones. I don't know. I'm not super familiar with the core graphics, admittedly. But again, best case scenario, that's 7 additional games of compatibility. Worst case scenario, it's 5 additional games of compatibility. Is that worth going from one to the other? Probably not. So I guess that's the final, in case it isn't really, really obvious. What I'm basically saying is, if you don't have one of these, absolutely get this. If you like the PC Engine, it's totally worth your time. It's totally worth the money. TerraOnion did a phenomenal job. If you're thinking about upgrading it's probably not worth the money to upgrade from one to the other unless you really need native HDMI out that isn't as good as the RGB, slightly improved RGB, or you just really like the SuperGrafx but don't own one. So there you go. That'll pretty much do it. Thank you very much for watching. Again, if you guys could please like, comment, subscribe, I appreciate that. Thank you very much to Stone Age Gamer once again for hooking me up with this, and TerraOnion for continuing to make these really cool devices that really just bring out the best in things that we've, you know, kind of had access to, but now it's like a whole new world of retro accessibility. It's great. And TerraOnion makes awesome stuff. Link in the description to Stone Age Gamer. Again, there's also links in there to my new channel, as well as Instagram, Discord, Patreon, all that, Twitter, all that sort of stuff. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.